Hi, everyone. I'm here to read a fun story that I thought of this morning when Mr. Wuszke went to his favorite bakery, McCree's, and got some donuts. Mrs. Wuszke's been trying her best not to eat extras because while staying at home, it seems like we keep eating extras. And so I've been not eating any extras for the last few weeks. And so when he came home with these lovely donuts, it made me think of this book. And so I thought I'd pull it out. Arnie the Doughnut. This is one of my favorite silly stories. And it's really a book that it's going to, I hope I can read it to the best of my abilities here so you can see everything, but it might be one that you have to stop by my room and read it by yourselves next year. So, Arnie the Doughnut by Laurie Keller. Arnie turned out to be just the kind of donut he'd hoped to be. Chocolate covered with the bright colored candy sprinkles. Look at all my sprinkles. There must be a million of them. He was made very early in the morning at the downtown bakery, home of the best donuts around. Arnie was proud to be one of the best. He knew that people all over town made special trips to his bakery to buy donuts of their very own. See, Arnie? That's my favorite kind of donuts. As Arnie sat on the tray, which has just been placed in the donut case, he took a moment to reflect on the amazing things that had happened to him in the morning. Cut into a ring, deep fried, cooled, iced, sprinkled, and named. Arnie looked around and saw all sorts of donuts sitting nearby. There were crullers, howdy Frenchie, and there were powdered donuts, and there were square donuts, and there was the Long John, and there were cinnamon twists and donut holes and jelly filled. Ooh, he's oozing his brains out. It's not just brains, silly, it's jelly. Oh, and there's the chocolate zebra donut. Oh, it's not chocolate zebra, it's chocolate frosting, he yelled. Oh, and there's the eclair and the iced chocolate. You know, it's a little blue icing would be fabulous on you. Oh, I like it plain, he said. Oh, and then there's the cream filled. Oh, and the apple fritter and the glazed. You tried to strike up a conversation with the apple fritter on the next tray over, but she didn't seem to want to talk. Hey, how about a deep fryer? Any relation to the Larry fritter? Want to come to my sprinkles? And then he didn't understand why she didn't want to talk. It's rather early, he thought. Maybe she's not a morning donut, Arnie supposed. See all the donuts? It was 6 a.m. and the baker had just hung the sign open in the window. Arnie was fascinated as he watched customers stream into the bakery. One by one, donuts were chosen, placed in paper bags, and whisked away with the new owners. Some went by the dozen in giant boxes. This is so exciting! I wonder who will choose me, Arnie thought. Goodbye, Arnie yelled to each donut. Have a great trip. Just then, Arnie looked up and he saw a man pointing right at him. Moi? But before he could say another word, he was pulled from the tray and placed in a paper bag of his very own. Thank you, Mr. Bing. Have a nice day, Arnie heard the baker say to the man. Mr. Bing? That's a fine name, Arnie decided. I can hardly wait to meet him. The ride to Mr. Bing's apartment was a little bumpy. Arnie was grateful for the soft napkin the baker had so thoughtfully placed underneath him in the bag. He had never ridden in a car and wished he could look out the window to see all the sights, but more than anything, he wished he could meet Mr. Bing. Why does he keep me in this bag? Arnie wondered. Finally, the car came to a stop, and they were home. Mr. Bing carefully removed Arnie from his paper bag and placed him on a clean, shiny plate. What a handsome plate, Arnie said to himself. I'm not crazy about the design. I prefer a more modern look, but it is nothing a little paint can't fix. Mr. Bing gently lifted Arnie from his new plate. Isn't that cute, thought Arnie as he closed his eyes and smiled. He wants to hold me. As Arnie relaxed in Mr. Bing's hand, he felt himself moving higher and higher from his plate. When he opened his eyes to see where he was going, he discovered that he was headed straight for Mr. Bing's open mouth. What are you doing? Shouted Arnie. Mr. Bing was stunned. He dropped Arnie back onto the plate. I was going to eat you, he replied in shock. Eat me? Arnie shrieked, his sprinkles flying everywhere. Why would you do a thing like that? Do you make a habit of eating all your house guests? No, of course not. So why did you suddenly occur to eat me? Arnie demanded. Well, because you're a donut? That's what donuts are for, to eat? Do you mean to tell me you've done this before? Yes, I eat a donut every day, Mr. Bing said sheepishly. Arnie froze. He felt sick and frightened and angry. Well, that explains why my friends never write or call. They probably have all been eaten. He thought to himself for a moment. I must put a stop to this right away. I'll call the bakery and warn the others, whoever's left, that is. Arnie knew that there was no time to waste, and then he needed to be very sneaky in order to keep his plan from Mr. Bing. He turned to Mr. Bing and said in his sweetest voice, Excuse me, sir. I don't believe we've been properly introduced. My name is Arnie. Hello, Arnie, Mr. Bing stammered. I'm Mr. Bing. It's nice to meet you. Mr. Bing, would you be a dear and allow me to use your telephone? Arnie asked extra politely. Well, okay, said Mr. Bing, and he handed Arnie the telephone. As quickly as he could remember, Arnie dialed the bakery number. You see Arnie on the phone? This is very strange, isn't it? The baker answered the phone. Downtown bakery, home of the best. Mr. Baker Man, Arnie frantically whispered. This is Arnie, the donut. Do you remember me? You made me at 5:15 this morning, and I was brought about 20 minutes ago by a man who goes by the name of Mr. Bing. Yes, Arnie, the baker answered. What can I do for you? Now, I don't want to alarm you, but just moments ago, the man tried to eat me, and not only that, he claims to have eaten hundreds of us. I'm going to make a run for it, but I wanted to warn you so that you, if you see him coming into the bakery again, you can stop him. Okay, Arnie, I thought you understood. That's why I make donuts, for people to eat. I can't believe it, Arnie gasped. Are the other donuts aware of this arrangement? Well, I think so, the baker said. Let me ask them to make sure. Arnie was showing signs of shock as he heard, and his eyes popped out of his head. The baker yelled to the other donuts. Do you donuts know what you're going to be? Do you donuts know that you're going to be eaten? Yes, we know, the donuts shouted back. We're delicious! People love C'est magnifique! Try us for yourself. Did you hear that, Arnie? The baker asked. Arnie was crushed. The phone dropped from his hand. He heard all that he needed to hear. Arnie forgot all about his plan to escape, and he collapsed back onto the plate. Glanced up at Mr. Bing and muttered, "All right, then, let's get this over with. Go ahead and eat me." Oh, poor Arnie. Mr. Bing gazed down at Arnie. I'm not going to eat you, Arnie, he said reassuringly. I just wouldn't feel right about it now. Really? Arnie said with a huge sigh of relief. I'm so glad to see that you've come to your senses. But since I'm not going to eat you, Mr. Bing continued, I'll have to figure something else to do with you. I pay good money for you. I don't want to be wasteful. Well, of course not, Arnie agreed, as they're talking to each other. So, what we need to do is each make a list of things I can do with you instead of eating you. Between the two of us, I know we'll come up with something. Good plan, Mr. Bing, Arnie said. This will be a breeze. I bet I'm good at a lot of things. They both feverishly wrote down their ideas. When they were finished, Mr. Bing asked, Would you like me to read yours first? Sure thing, Mr. Bing, Arnie answered. Things Mr. Bing can do with me instead of eating me. Do you need a ballroom dancing partner? No, I don't dance. You could use me as a personal fitness trainer. I'd get too sweaty. How about a portrait painter? Oh, heavens, no. Would you like me to entertain you at parties? I don't throw parties. I could be your chauffeur. But you can't see over the steering wheel. I'd make a great bodyguard. Who could you protect me from? A cookie? All right, Mr. Bing, let's hear what you came up with. Okie dokie, he replied. I just know you'll like some of these. Things I could do with Arnie instead of eating him. I could use you as a pincushion. Oh, that would be painful. How about an air freshener for my car? How about not? Would you like to be a picture frame? Don't imagine so. I need a new bowling ball. Well, don't look at me. You'd make a fine paperweight. Boring. Then what about a doorstop? Try again. But there was nothing else on Mr. Bing's list. They were both completely out of ideas. Those are pretty kind of interesting ideas they both came up with, but nothing worked. Arnie and Mr. Bing were exhausted. They felt terribly disappointed, and after a few minutes of awkward silence, Mr. Bing finally spoke. I'm sorry, Arnie, but it's clear that we can't agree on anything for you to do around here. This is difficult for me to say, but I think it would be best if you found another home. I know, said Arnie, fighting back tears. I'll just be on my way then. If it's all right with you, I'll keep this napkin to pack up all my loose sprinkles. Of course, Mr. Bing replied sadly. As soon as I get a job, I'll pay you back the money you spent on me. That's not necessary, Arnie. Arnie shook Mr. Bing's hand and thanked him for his kindness. Mr. Bing opened the door, and as Arnie left, he paused and said, I guess donuts really are only good for eating, aren't they? They both waved goodbye, and Arnie was gone. Sad, isn't it? Mr. Bing stood at the window and watched as Arnie walked away. He walked past the flower beds and the mailboxes and the apartment manager's office, and all of the bugs said, Adios, Arnie. No mail for me as he walked by the post box. Is there anything worse than a sad pastry? The bird said. Remember how happy I was at the beginning of the story, Arnie said. He passed the tennis court, the swimming pool, and the clubhouse. But when Arnie reached the "No Dogs Allowed" sign at the end of the driveway, Mr. Bing suddenly came up with a new idea. Arnie, wait up, yelled Mr. Bing as he ran after him. Arnie turned back and stopped when Mr. Bing caught up with him. He was fresh out of breath. Can't believe it. I didn't think of this earlier, Mr. Bing panted. Arnie, I've always wanted a dog. Arnie, but there's no dogs allowed here. And no donuts allowed. Arnie perked up when he realized that Mr. Bing was what he was thinking. Would you like to take walks and play fetch? Mr. Bing asked excitedly. You bet I would. Can you do tricks like rolling over? Rolling over? Look at me. I was made for rolling over. Well, then, there's only one thing left to ask. Arnie, would you be my donut dog? Oh, Mr. Bing, I would love to be your donut dog. It's kind of wacky, but it might just work out, the bird says down here. From that moment on, Arnie and Mr. Bing were inseparable. Arnie liked being a donut dog even better than he liked being a donut. He went through a short phase of chewing on furniture and barking at the mailman, but after a crash course in obedience school, he graduated first in his class. Everywhere the two of them went, people would stop to pet Arnie. No one ever had seen a donut dog before. Arnie and Mr. Bing had so much fun together. Arnie was the best pet Mr. Bing could ever have hoped for, and Mr. Bing was Arnie's best friend. Whoever would have thought you could be friends with a donut and never eat it? I could never have done that, especially a chocolate sprinkled donut. Oh, my favorite. Hope you enjoyed it. See you later.